Hi, my name is Amro Sallam. I'm one of the original founders of Architects for Society, which is a nonprofit architecture design firm focused on the disadvantaged communities worldwide across the different economic strata. And I'm calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
My name is Adam Wipple. I'm a board member of Architects for Society. Amro and I have known each other since our undergraduate days at the University of Illinois in Champaign. And we've kept touch over the years as we've both worked at pretty well-known architecture firms around the country and around the world. I think the only overlap, I think we both worked at SOM at some point. I'm calling in from Chicago, Illinois. And we're excited to be a part of this exhibition.
So the Hex House was kind of our response to, at the time, in 2016 and 2017, when the height of the refugee crisis hit Europe. And as you know, or as you may not know, Architects for Society has partners all over the world. We're a collection of engineers and designers and physicists and academics and practitioners. So we had people in Germany saying, what is our solution for this? And so that was the impetus that started that. And so we started, we also had boots on the ground in places like Jordan and Amman, Jordan, where we could access the Al-Za'atari camp and really be able to grab a lot of valuable information about the life of refugees and the dire conditions that they live in. So that was the impetus that started it, but it evolved over the years, and it's evolved into something that is a tiny home, that is something that it's rapidly deployable. All the things that we sought out to design the home are still applicable across different let's say economic stratifications on the low end. So we're really trying to see how we can, on the low end, I mean on the low economic end, but we're really trying to see how we can imbue high design and really high end sustainability features into the home without a lot of cost. So that's been always the impetus for us, and a continuum throughout the design process for us. And as we evolve the unit.
Just to kind of provide a little more background on Architects for Society. So this is is this a volunteer, like nonprofit organization that sort of links various architects around the world together to solve problems? Or do you want to just maybe give me a little more background on that and what other projects besides the Hex House have been developed out of that collective?
Sure, it is a collective. Architects for Society it's a nonprofit, 501c3, established in Minnesota initially, and registered in Minnesota. And essentially, it's maybe a slight misnomer. It's not meant as a society of architects. Rather, it's just architects for the benefit of society. And that's where it basically a group of like-minded architects, engineers, planners, artists, and physicists came together because of past experience of working together. Nothing more, nothing less.
How many people are part of this?
So we've got a couple different parts of the organization. There's obviously the board, which is I think it's made up of members from Germany, Canada, Amro and I in the United States. I believe there's one member in Dubai. It's the board, and then we also have sort of an advisory type of council or board as well. And those members are India, Italy. We're on mainly in North America and Europe, and we have some presence in Asia.
Yeah. And the Hex House is a concept that's, I guess, owned by Architects for Society, or who's the parent organization, or who would be in charge of dealing with sales and orders and coordinating manufacturing?
So Architects for Society does own the copyright to the Hex House. In terms of how we're approaching the market, I think this is what that's been our biggest challenge, and one that we've been trying to solve and trying in different ways. The biggest hurdle for us is that the main component of the Hex House are structural insulated panels, which make up the entire envelope in most cases. So floor, wall, and roof panels are all structural insulated panels. And those panels must be manufactured near where the building will be constructed because they're expensive to ship. In some cases, you can't overcome it, but in general, it's advisable to try and get the manufacturer near where the site is. So what we've tried to do is reach out to various manufacturers throughout the states, at least, to try and form partnerships. And the challenge is there that the SIPs are different depending on the manufacturer. So each home really has to be designed using the manufacturer's details. And so it's we've debated whether or not we should try and take in the panel manufacturing ourselves just to create some consistency. However, as you know, it's a different undertaking because now you're moving from a design firm to a manufacturing company. And then as you start to try and take on more and more responsibility, it becomes, a very time and energy consuming process. And right now we're trying to figure out, is there a way for us to just remain as the design component and find the partnership? So we would need a SIP manufacturer and general contractor in different regions. And in some cases, we're talking to companies that are trying to start their own SIP manufacturing facilities. And we would try and create a partnership with them where they have potentially they have the license for that region to provide Hex homes. So we're looking at different models to how we can, provide these on a more expanded geographic platform. It's been challenging.
The concept was developed in 2016, 2017. When was the first prototype built, and then how many have been sold to date, and where are they?
In 2018 was the first prototype that we built, and that was in the U.S. and that was for a conference for the Nobel Peace Prize, and it was just a 2-week endeavor where we put it up in 5 days and we took it down in 2 days. Then we moved that unit to Bayfield, Wisconsin, where it's now been up for a couple of years. We have the other unit, which we built as actually a community center in Germany. It's not really meant, it was never really meant as a home. So it served a small community of refugees as a place where they can gather, and they had some outside gardening, and inside they had daycare and language courses. And then we built another one in Amsterdam during Design Week also in 20. Do you remember, Adam, what year that was?
I want to say that was 2018 as well, but later in the year. Yeah.
So that was also an exhibition piece which we built with, and all these units were built with slightly different technologies. As you can imagine, we try to adapt to what the local available the local building culture is different in Europe than it is in the US, as you know, and as it is in the Middle East. So we always envisioned that this unit would would allow for this flexibility that the kit of parts would slightly change, but it still would maintain this sort of kit of parts with slightly different modifications, or maybe even radically different modifications, like instead of a wooden beam that, for instance, that we used in Minnesota, in Amsterdam, or in the Netherlands, they used hollow metal steel. So it's still the same kit of parts. It still allowed people to build it by their hands, but it was radically different framing technique. So, and the same thing for the German unit, was a radically different framing technique.
One of the key areas that we've been focusing on, just because some of the feedback that we had received was that when there's topography, when the ground is not even, it's difficult to lay out for the shape, which I kind of understand, but it's a perfect geometry. So it seems like it shouldn't be that difficult. And we're trying to work on ways to make it sort of easier for the final user to lay out. But the foundation system really can be whatever you want. It can be a slab on grade. It can be done with helical piers. It can be done with, in flood areas. It could be done with piles with some piers to elevate the structure. So it's very flexible in terms of how you site this. I've been looking at actually some hand installed piers to see if there's a possibility that a person could do it, him or herself, by hand screwing piers in, and would that actually be able to handle the weight of the building? So that's a big hurdle for us to try and perfect. But once the foundation system's in, this is a system that basically you're fully enveloped with in a matter of days. It shows all the walls as single pieces, but really those can be broken down into panels that can be handled by a couple people, and then placed where they need to go by hand. And you just start assembling it like a kit, like you would if you were building a much smaller model. So you start to place the walls together. And then once the walls are in place, you start to set the roof panels in. And once everything is connected in that regard, the envelope is essentially done. And you're weather tight. I mean, for the most part, depending on your SIPs, you might have to put on a roof system. You might have to put on siding to make the final waterproofing layer in place. But what it does is allows you to start to move the trades in and out of the home. And in a disaster relief situation, you're sheltered, right? You might not have all the amenities yet, but you're sheltered very quickly. And you can actually work inside the building to finish it while staying dry, warm, whatever. So I do think that that's an advantage of the design, is that you're able to use the building as a home pretty quickly.
And tell me a little bit more about the hexagon. So how did you guys come up with this design? I'm just looking at the foundation here. So it's like these standardized. Are those wood beams?
The model here is showing actually a steel beam configuration, or a metal beam. Could be.
Oh, those
aluminum.
are I-beams.
Yeah, that's what they're shown as. But if you look at the foundation without the floor on it, real quick. That X that kind of comes across is not really needed. Is what we found is that the SIPs can span from that center beam to the perimeter. So those, these cross beams are not normally necessary. So the prototypes that we built, the one in Minneapolis doesn't include those, but has perimeter and that center beam are all ganglam like a glue lamb type beams. The one in Germany actually uses kind of more of a traditional framing method where they're using joists to frame from the perimeter beams to that center beam, and then they create the walls are sitting on top of that floor. And I believe the one in Amsterdam, Amro, you have to remind me. I think it used
hollow metal.
it used light gauge metal, right? Was it in this configuration, or did they only had the perimeter and the center beam as well?
No, they had a slightly different configuration as well.
Yes. So it's and we're developing an aluminum frame right now that we think might work to our advantage, but I've gotten different feedback from contractors, and that you might have to bring in a different crew to do it, so it might not be as cost effective as we hoped. But the foundation system is pretty simple. The floor can span about 12 feet. This is the hexagon is, or the Hex House is a hexagon that is inscribed in a 14-foot radius circle. So all the spans are 12 or less for the most part. And I guess the one last point here is that while the floors are designed as SIPs, it's not necessary for the floor to be a structural insulated panel if you're deciding to do it off of a slab, or if you want to do more traditional framing, it's completely acceptable.
And these, so I guess so it's 14-foot radius, and then what's like the total square footage then? I guess just without doing my quick SAT math, what is the square footage?
Exactly 510 square feet.
Oh wow! So it's a pretty good size. It's much bigger than a tiny home. It's a pretty good sized footprint.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea was that we sought out to design a dignified home, not something that's meant to be oppressive to the human, because we recognize that people live in these for a very long period of time. So yeah, we wanted to give them a decent size home. It's not even a tiny home; it's a small home. And one of the things about the hexagon is it's one of the shapes that closes in on itself. That is found in nature, and that when put next to each other, you will never have any gaps. So it's a very convenient, more structurally rigid shape. Also, when you have that extra 2 breaks in the exterior skin of the building, you become much more rigid structurally.
Is the floor looks like it's 2 hexagon shapes and cut in half. Is that like a standard size that a SIPs manufacturer could make, or is the way that the floor kind of comes together, is that challenging, or are these usually triangles that come together, or is that a standard shape?
They're usually actually strips. So there would be a 4-foot wide by 12-foot long SIP, and they would just be placed next to each other and connected. The way this model reads is that, this is all totally possible to make SIPs this size, but you would not be able to move these with just human force. You would have to crane them in. So that's not really ideal, but it made this video a little bit more, it just made it more accessible, because you get the floor on, and then you start putting the walls on, and you get to the roof. So really all these pieces would be a series of structural insulated panels connected together.
Yep. And the interior walls are also SIPs. Same material.
They can be, or they don't necessarily have to be. But we recommend that you can do a little bit thinner SIP, because you're just trying to get the structural elements. You're not necessarily trying to get insulation. It's more for sound attenuation. Mm-hmm. But we do recommend that the plumbing wall, you just either do it with a SIP and then a framed wall in front of it, or just do it in a framed wall so you can hide the plumbing, and it makes it a much more reasonable installation for the tradesman.
Yeah, the beauty of this is that, so at the lowest end we have an 8-foot, a typical 8-foot, but because it's a SIP and it's spanning across, we end up at the ridge at about 12 feet. So we end up with a pretty nice vaulted ceiling, where we can, in one of the cases where we actually started slotting in extra sleeping spaces and extra storage because the ceilings were so high. So we have some lofted areas in the bedroom.
Yeah, so it's yes, that's cool. So it's not a flat roof. It actually has that middle wall that creates sort of the vaulted sort of expansive space in each room.
That's right, and it also helps makes the space feel much bigger than it really is. The slightly awkward shape of the room kind of distorts the feeling of that you're actually only in a 100 square foot room, and then the vaulted ceiling. It just, when you're in the space, it makes it feel much bigger than it is.
How did you come? Why did you do the vaulted ceiling versus a flat roof? It seems like if this is made for refugee situations, like, I guess simpler the better. Or how'd you come to that design? Is it really not that much more complex?
Yeah, it's actually just a simplification of the design. The SIP already is structural, so it's doing the spanning.
Yeah.
And there's no need for any other extra framing. If you were to frame this out of conventional framing, yeah, then you end up with a bottom chord of the truss, which would lower your ceilings at the 8-foot level. So it's just the advent of using SIPs.
Structural, and it really creates the volume that you're inhabiting. I also think that the fact that we're able to get that extra height allows for, like Amro's mentioned, lofted areas in certain places. It also allows for us to install some of the mechanical equipment up higher. And if you don't want to see that sort of thing, you can put an 8-foot ceiling in and just kind of create a sort of crawl space that holds the equipment above.
Okay.
Just another way to lend flexibility.
Do any of these designs have a bathroom included in them? Does the prototype home have a bathroom in it, or where's that placed?
If you play the video just a little bit further, when it places all the finishes in it, so yeah.
Okay,
So you see the kitchen and the bathroom share the plumbing wall. So you can see the kitchen sink and the refrigerator or whatever.
Yeah.
Then you can see the shower, sort of, it's the one plumbing fixture that's off the plumbing wall. But there, you would see a toilet and a vanity sink kind of back to back with the kitchen countertop. So all the Hex homes have a wet wall that can be used either as to make a bathroom and a kitchen, or you can, presumably you could do 2 bathrooms and not have a kitchen. Say if it was you were using it for a classroom or something like that, and you really wanted to have separate bathroom facilities for the faculty versus the students, or female versus male. So it does lend itself to some amount of flexibility.
Roughly how many parts does the whole hexagon break out to be? Like, could you basically have like the 20 parts of the 20 SIPs panels sort of all custom pre-cut beforehand and then fit into a shipping container, or how do you envision this arriving to a site?
So one of the ways we've been working on a project where the islands in the Bahamas are looking for solutions to build housing quickly for, I say quickly, but the hurricanes that they're building housing hit 3 years ago. So people have been without housing for that long. But in that case, what we were looking to do is pre-cut all the panels and put all the materials that are needed to complete one home into a shipping container. And we would ship it down to the island, and the shipping container would be taken from the dock and placed on the site.
The idea is that what we're really, look, the future is in really democratizing architecture and really being able to give the end user the ability to go online and be able to design their own unit, have it delivered to them, and be able to, with very little help, assemble it. So whether this means we have this is what some of the things that we're looking at the future. How do we lay this thing out? We struggle, for example, with some of the things with the foundation and locating the foundation and constructability of that. And so we're looking at VR and AR and augmented reality to be able to mitigate some of these things. We really see a future in technology and combining low tech and high tech, and really being able to say, okay, this person went online and configured their unit and it arrived on site flat packed, and again with some help was able to do, let's say, 90% of it, and maybe the other 20% is done by professionals. But there's also there's a video that comes along with it. There's maybe the AR is also showing you where the units go and where the pieces go. And so we're really looking into this because there's a lot of possibilities and freedoms, things that were really going to free us up to do more interesting things with these units.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Like, as far as like just the mass amount of destruction in places like Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, so this idea really kind of gives that power back to the people to rebuild their own communities with perhaps locally sourced materials. Are the SIPs, would they be I guess in a perfect world, they'd be manufactured in each country that the home is being built in. So there's sort of creates its own local economy and job force that could build the homes organically.
Yeah, there's actually, so we've been in conversations with a couple folks that have portable SIP making equipment. So theoretically, we could provide the manufacturing equipment to, in the order. So we could send, a container with raw materials and the equipment beforehand, and they can use the container that it comes in to set up a SIP making facility. And then they can make their own wall panels. And then really moving forward, they would just have to order the raw materials. And the reason that that's so powerful is that, if the SIPs are made with polyurethane, the material comes in like pressurized tanks. So it expands to many times its original volume. So, you're able to ship a lot of materials, in a pretty small volume. So I think ideally that's how we would want to move forward in remote locations. And I think the biggest challenges there are, will the local, building, departments, if they have it, will they allow it? The SIPs, I think the biggest challenge with SIPs right now is that you have to go through a rigorous and expensive testing process to get them approved for use. And, I'm not saying that that's not a good idea, because obviously in a perfect world it is, but it is a barrier to be more universal and more accessible to people. And I do think that someone needs to take a look at how we can do this in a more, efficient manner.
So there's portable, that's interesting. There's portable SIP factories, or what do you, like, they fit inside a shipping container, or what, how portable are they?
It's like a mold press. So you imagine like a kind of like a big kind of hydraulic clamshell. You open it up, you put your skins in, you close it, and then you inject it with polyurethane, and then you cure it. So in traditional SIP construction is used OSB with an adhesive and then expanded polystyrene as the insulation, EPS, which is basically styrofoam. And the newer method, which would use polyurethane, would allow you to, create the SIP with a press, and the polyurethane actually acts as the adhesive holding the panel together. So it's really, I think, taking it to a different level.
How'd you guys choose these materials? Why SIPs, and why this particular type of sandwich material combination?
Well, the main advantage of the SIP is that you are achieving both structure and very high R values with one component. So for us, it was so compelling to remove as many steps as possible. So you've got, theoretically, if the skins are available, you have your final exterior layer, you have your structure, you have your insulated value, and you have your interior finish. And it was one process. It wasn't put the frame up, put the sheathing on, put the insulation in, put the building paper on, put the siding on, now put the dry, what I mean? It eliminates probably 15 steps. And in cases of, disaster relief, especially, the faster you can create a safe and weather-tight enclosure for someone to shelter in, the better.
So in this example that we're looking at right here, the exterior is, so this is a sandwich panel, but does it have a separate exterior that's added on top, or is that part of the SIP? It has both the interior wall and the exterior siding.
In this particular case, the SIP manufacturer that was closest and would work with us makes SIPs with the kind of the historically the historic type of materials, OSB and EPS. So in this case, yes, you actually had to put siding on it. In this case, T111 siding was put on the face of the SIP on the exterior, and the interior, I believe, has gypsum board. Is that right, Amro?
Yes, the final version just has a gypsum board, but the initial version we just painted. We just painted the interior OSB.
Okay, yeah. So to answer your question, I think that one of the challenges that we're facing is that SIP manufacturers tend to provide primarily OSB and EPS SIPs because of two reasons. One, the cost is less, although OSB prices just doubled in the last month. So maybe that's not true anymore, but historically that's been a big driver. And the other reason is that I've already mentioned they've tested and they've gotten all the testing materials done for this particular assembly because has been around the longest. So instead of taking on another round of testing, they've continued to sell this particular version. And I think it's becoming more and more common, but it's still not there where you can get a SIP manufacturer to provide skins made out of magnesium oxide or fiber cement board. In some cases, there's some that have like a corrugated metal. So it's coming. It's just that for every alternative, you have to go through a rigorous testing, process that takes usually over a year and costs almost $100,000. So these are the barriers that make, that are in the way of SIP construction. And I think once you can overcome those, we'll be in a much better place to help people that need housing.
So is the SIPs with both the interior and the exterior in sort of the way that you want it, is that currently tested and certified and readily available in the US?
Yes, but not nearly to the regional extents that we would be interested in partnering with. So they are available in certain markets, which is great, but we want to standardize if we can throughout the, where we're providing these throughout the US and throughout the world. So, ideally we'd want to, like I said, come up with a solution that we could overcome that. So it's either that the SIP manufacturers, start to become more willing to provide those alternate skins and alternate processes, or we figure out a way to provide the SIP making equipment as part of the kit, and we certify it, or the manufacturer of the equipment certifies it, and that certification follows the equipment. That would be another way to overcome it.
And as far as durability and resilience factors with this design, so I'm assuming these panels are up to a certain standard of fire resistance and mold and wind strength, or how is it designed, and what conditions is it great for, and maybe what are the conditions that it maybe isn't designed for? Is it built up to seismic code for California, wind code for Florida?
So it depends. It's like the units that you see, the unit that you see here has been, the system is what we call in the construction world a closed system. So it's been tested for all these things: seismic, wind, snow loads, and all kinds of lateral axial loads. But depending on the region that you're working in, there may be certain ones that are tested for seismic. Like if you're working in Florida, you'll get ones that are tested for hurricane wind loads. But depending on, if you won't be able to find those obviously in the Midwest. In the West Coast, you'll be able to find some manufacturers who tested theirs for seismic, but obviously that won't be found in the Midwest.
And because this
Adam,
is being assembled on site, is this subject to a state's off-site manufacturing code, or is this being inspected during the construction process by the local municipality, or where does this fit in the off-site kind of modular construction process?
I think it falls into the kind of more traditional construction realm, where there are inspections called for and performed on site. I mean, when you think about it, Amro's right, it's a closed system, but since the building is assembled on site, it's really lends itself to kind of a more, traditional way of inspections.
Okay, and then as far as it sounds like, so as far as customization and sort of flexibility, so customization of the siding kind of really depends on the SIPs manufacturer in the region, and sort of what's readily available. But it sounds like you can also add on whatever siding you want to on top of the SIP. Is that right?
Absolutely.
That's right.
And then
even like our hope would be that we could provide a SIP that has a final exterior layer. However, that is mainly to get people into a home that will suit them and they don't have to worry about, it being inadequate. But we also realize that people have different tastes. So you might have a cement board exterior SIP, but in a couple years you want to do some cedar siding or something, and that's completely acceptable.
Yeah, so you could really fit this Hex House to fit any kind of architectural or neighborhood character that you may need in order to comply with historical code or some kind of design aesthetic of the area.
Yeah, we haven't really looked at, masonry solutions. To be honest, I wouldn't probably recommend it. Maybe like a thin brick installed over the wall panels is fine. But in terms of, installing like a veneer or something of brick, I don't think that would be a solution that we'd recommend, just because it kind of negates the whole idea of the home being light and being able to be disassembled if it needed to be. So I think that's the one area that we would, have challenges with.
You couldn't make this look like a stone cabin?
Maybe we can, but I have a feeling that it would cost more than you want to pay, and I'm not sure if it would be it would ultimately pay off.
It seems like it really depends on the SIPs that you use, but are there any other green design aspects that are worth noting here?
Well, one of the major things that we have been, exploring are how do you incrementally make this, an off-grid possibility? I mean, the roof itself is over 700 square feet. It's bigger than obviously the floor plan. So it would take about 15 solar panels, to be able to take this 100% off grid, depending on what your exposure is. So I think there's some realistic off the grid electrical solutions. You could also have some, off-site wind, or you could have a solar farm that many of these structures share. When it comes to gray water management, I think that's a solution that we could employ. We could have a composting toilet, and gray water reclamation from the sinks that could be used in flushing the toilets. Potable water, I think, is a big challenge in that most municipalities won't allow reclaimed water to be used as potable, even if you have an approved filtration system. So I think that's a bigger challenge. But if you can make it 100% electric, because the loads are so low, because it's a closed system, I think that's probably your best off the grid solution. And then the water and that's probably one that would have to be, I don't know, like maybe you could have a sort of water buffalo that's a separate facility, and then have all the units sort of feed from it. And then that water gets replaced with other potable water. But I think that's the bigger off the grid challenge that we've seen.
And want to just go back to this this animation of these homes being expanded on. So as far as them, the connectability of them and sort of continuing to expand over time, I think that's like sort of an interesting aspect. So how would these, let's say you had one in a encampment or a village or something and started adding on and expanding the rooms, how easy is that so I guess you pop off one panel of one side of the hexagon and then sort of start building from there, or how do you envision expanding this over time? Like what kind of flexibility is there?
I think you'd actually build the expansion and enclose it before you actually cut into the existing unit. If you know you're planning to expand, the SIPs can be designed so you can remove a large portion of the common wall to create the pass-through. But I wouldn't do it until after the new expansion has been finished, just so you're, you're not dealing with any construction debris. You're not dealing with the construction personnel or people doing the construction in your family, for example, won't be crossing paths. So it's easy to expand as long as you follow the sequence that I think is most desirable.
And again, we're only talking about 7 to 8 days of construction time, so of the enclosure. So it's a pretty quick turnaround time to be weather tight.
And as far as adding a second story, are these stackable? I know you don't have a staircase in these plans, but if you had some sort of exterior spiral staircase, how strong is the roof panels if you did a flat surface, and like how structurally sound are the SIPs as far as, they provide a lot of the structural integrity or they provide the entire structural integrity of the structure. Could you do a second story with these walls and the way it's designed?
I think 100%. I mean, you would do a flat SIP floor versus the roof, and then you would start to build the upper unit on top of it. Now that's if they're separate units. If you want to combine them, I think the challenge is that the hexagon configuration doesn't lend itself particularly well to put in an interior stair. But if you're doing stackable units and you are separating them and not providing vertical circulation in the interior, I think it's probably pretty easy. You just have to create an exterior deck system, so you have exit and you have two means, two directions for egress.
And by the way, the orientation that you see here is only one orientation. These could be lined up in a straight line and allow for that vertical circulation to happen.
Is there precedence for these being stacked, and how many stories could they go without needing additional reinforcement on the first floor? I mean, obviously you'd build the foundation for say 2 or 3 stories, but is there precedence for this type of technology being stacked up, or is this typically only used for 1-story purposes?
Yeah. Look, and this goes back to the same question of longevity and durability. So SIPs are used on multifamily housing every day, and multifamily housing construction going up to 4, 5, 6 stories. So it's not a material that is meant to be only for single story and temporary. It is a pretty robust building material when combined correctly, of course, with other more traditional construction techniques. You can build as high as you want.
And there's no
there's going to be,
like timber walls or framing that needs to be done past 1 story.
No. I do believe that you would be, the challenges here are probably not with the structural system and more of fire suppression and egress, which I think would be something that might take the project into a less cost-effective realm. But that would be determined on, what code is prevalent, and then how big are you trying to make it. I think once you get above a certain height, you've got, requirements for elevators, you have requirements for a lot of things that suddenly make the construction technique not that advisable.
In that case, I think you would have to go, and we've looked at a pre-existing structural system that then these pods would be able to sort of get plugged into. so that they're completely separate, but there's an infrastructure there, structural system, including electrical and mechanical, and that these pods would theoretically just plug into and stack on top of each other.
It's a surprising experience to be inside of one of these. It doesn't feel like you're in some sort of odd shaped, makeshift home. It really does feel like a traditional type of home, but I think the volume and the geometry of the hexagon makes it feel a lot more voluminous, and it really doesn't feel like a 500 square foot volume. I do think that there's some advantages, some that we had anticipated and some that were sort of serendipitous that make these to be great places to spend time. So at an angle, it really does sort of distort your perspective. I always compare it to sort of the perspective tricks that the Greeks used on the Parthenon to make it appear a little bit different than it was. So they created an offset structure to make it look like it was more of a perfect shape. Whereas this, it's like kind of not in that vein, because we want it to feel like you're in a rectilinear space, but it's, the perspective is kind of distorted. So you feel like it's a lot bigger than it is. So for example, that last shot where you're looking down in the living area, imagine, or that one, perfect, right? That one is the one with the skylight and the window kind of centered. You've got that sort of exaggerated perspective, and it makes that room feel like it's much bigger than it actually is. And I think that's something that as architects, we appreciate, but it needs to be sort of pointed out to those that aren't really thinking about those sorts of things and just feeling them. That's why, because your mind is taking in this information and it's creating an impression. And sometimes that's not necessarily a conscious thing. It's just something that's going on within. So, and then you see how high that center of it is. So you can imagine how that space can be used for storage, for maybe creating a whole other sort of canopy that your younger children can inhabit. So it does have like a lot of aspects that I think are advantageous.
Yeah, looking at that skylight there, that's so it seems like that skylight that's a pretty deep ceiling panel. It seems like the skylight's like kind of.
Those are 51 because it was designed for Minnesota.
Oh, right.
So it's a 10-inch thick SIP.
And that's probably designed for pretty heavy snow loads then too.
For sure. But it's also the skylight itself is on a curb. So that's part of the thickness that you're seeing as well.
Oh, it's kind of raised up above the roof surface.
Yeah. So when I'd say like in a more temperate climate, that roof panel would be more around 6 inches thick, maybe 8. Yeah, this is an interesting little panoramic, but again, you can kind of see how everything sort of feeds off of one another. There's not a lot of space that's wasted for circulation. What I mentioned at the beginning of the call is that where you see Mike, the gentleman in the flannel standing, that would have been a wall initially. And that would have been another room back there with the window. And he actually wanted that to be a larger studio space. So he had the wall removed, and Amro designed a beam to pick up the load that the wall was originally picking up.
So the bathroom is down this hallway right here past Amro. The bedroom is to the right. And then this whole space that is doing the panoramic shot is the living room, which could be split in half to do a room right here.
Correct.
Okay, got it. As far as just the real quick on the hookups, I saw this photo underneath the house. So, okay, so this shows a little more detail around how this foundation's set up here.
Yeah. This picture was taken as kind of a lesson learned one, because you can see how the pedestal is actually off center of the helical pier. Sorry about that picture, Amro. You look like you're about to sneeze. But you're looking right now, it's not enclosed yet, but this is where I think where all the utilities are coming up. So they're all, in a very centralized area. Yeah. So all the plumbing, I believe he has a gas. Does he have gas, I think, coming through there? Natural gas, are all coming through kind of that same area. And what he had planned is to enclose that and then, provide some sort of freeze relief just so it's not in danger of the weather when it drops low. But if you see right there, if you look at the helical pier to the left of that wood column, you can see the pedestal is off the pier, the center of the pier. So that's one of the things that, we're trying to overcome because, there's no reason why you can't hit these exactly. At this point in time, we have the technology to, make sure that these pedestals line up exactly with your helical pier or whatever your foundation system is. So I think that's one of the challenges for us is to make sure that we include whatever is necessary to make sure that gets laid out in a way that no one has to worry about missing the mark.
So we've seen a lot of unique and innovative features of this housing solution. What would you say the most innovative is?
Well, that's a good question. I think the exciting thing about this project for me was always the urban design implications and how this design can be used in a scalable way to create communities with public, semi-private, semi-public space. And I think that the geometry lends itself to that and also provides, the occupant with a new way to kind of experience community because you're not sort of lined up like dominoes looking one wall to another, but everything is kind of off kilter, allows you to get vistas and allows you to have a unique structure, even though all the volumes are similar.
To add that it's the unique feature is the system itself, is being able to develop a system that is amenable to the site, that is amenable to the country that you're in, and that allows the average person to be able to have a home, a dignified home, in a very short amount of time.
Awesome. Is there, what would you say the most misunderstood aspect is of either the design or the construction process that you've maybe had to over explain to folks out there?
Yeah, one of the biggest hurdles and always to explain to clients is and even for us to be able to solve is the cost. Construction, because we bid off a project that is meant to be dignified, that is meant to be durable, that is meant to be a regular home, but it's fastly deployable. We are always faced with people and clients who have a little bit of sticker shock of how much it costs, but they don't recognize that the longevity of it and the expandability of it is where and the fact that it's still, even if you compare it to the average construction costs, it's still very, very it's much less. So people are we're always surprised by how much people don't really understand how much construction costs in general.
And the construction,
I think originally
quote that you provide has both the bathroom and the kitchen included in that 510 square feet. The starting price for the whole package.
I mean, we are trying to get it into the $100 a square foot range, which is not going to be a fully, luxury finish type of home, but it'll have all the basics included, and you'll be able to live there and occupy it. And if you want to, change it over time, that's available to you to do.
So sort of the $50,000 to $60,000 range that includes a bathroom, a kitchen, includes the foundation work, the delivery costs.
The materials themselves are, uninstalled, I believe, are going to range between $35,000 and $40,000. So the rest is labor, and I do think that is one of the advantages of SIPs, is that the labor costs are much lower. And like Amro mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, is that the costs of SIPs are still surprisingly high. And I think a lot of it is based on some of the hurdles that the companies have to overcome, for testing and get certifications, but also they're able to charge that just because of the comparative cost of stick built. They're staying in that range or a little lower, and that's, God bless them. They can. But if we can get to a point where we can provide the equipment, or we can provide some means for disadvantaged populations to actually control those economics a little bit different or a little bit better. I mean, you're talking about SIPs that will cost 1/3 or 1/4 the amount of what they cost on, from established manufacturers. You're just with raw materials and pretty much unskilled labor.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely making it a lower skill assembly and construction process. Makes this much more available and approachable at price point. Is there anything I'm not asking that I should be asking, or anything you wanted to add?
Well, just to expand on the kind of two last points that I made. One is the fact that you can create a community with these, but also the idea that you create some, ability to provide jobs, I think is huge, because you're dealing a lot of times with populations that are extremely disadvantaged. They have been sort of left behind. They have, they don't feel like they get to participate in their well-being. And this is an opportunity to involve them not only in the design and customization of their own home, but also in the manufacturing, the assembly.
We're really trying to see how we can imbue high design and really high-end sustainability features into the home without a lot of cost. So that's been always the impetus for us, and a continuum throughout the design process for us.